All righty. So, oh, man, I just screwed up my window, so that's perfect timing. um, yep. So today we have John Fung for the October 2021 global-ish user group meeting. Now there's a second one, so this is not really the one anymore. So, but it's the OG user group, I guess. So, John, take it away. Otherwise, I'll keep talking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you to everybody for inviting me to the user group. I honestly didn't know that this was implemented, but I'm excited that it is. I mean, honestly, the community, giving back to the community is definitely one of the better parts of cybersecurity. I mean, look at all the cons, look at all the great content that's put out there for free, user material, all of those things. And literally none of it works without people giving back and doing these types of participation. So, kudos to everybody who made that happen. With that being said, standard introduction, I'm John Fung. I'm currently at Simpress Technologies, where I'm the deputy CISO. I oversee incident response, vulnerability management, continuous monitoring, global risk and compliance, or governance risk and compliance. So NIST, PCI, security training, third-party risk, all of those things, as well as, kind of our risk quantification efforts. And obviously underneath one of those things, one of the things on the periphery is security monitoring. And that's kind of where this is the tie into that. I've been a customer of Cribl now, and keep me honest, Jim, for about 4 to 5 months. We made an initial purchase after a self-guided POC. We like to see ourselves as being kind of scrappy and agile in the way that we implement things. And we were able to get our own Cribl instance up and flowing, doing our POC, and only engaging formally with the Cribl team right at the very end. Basically when we needed a PO so we could buy an enterprise edition. It was very easy to set up, and documentation was great. For us, everybody always asks why. And the most common one, and the thing that leads people to these discussions, is cost savings. And ultimately that is what brought us to start this journey, but it wasn't the reason why we decided to continue with it. I mean, everybody's heard the use cases of, moving from a traditional SIEM such as Splunk, and you save X number of dollars by being able to get off their infrastructure. And that is alluring. But ultimately, and we just had this conversation with our CTO, is we're willing to pay more dollars for something that is better. So cost savings wasn't ultimately the decision point for us. It wasn't kind of that inflection point that we want to take advantage of. What was that we try to be as agile of an organization as possible. We like to own our data. We want to be able to move it to what we see to be the next best technology coming down the road. And the only way to decouple, or the only way to do that, is to actually decouple storage from SIEM. And that's where Cribl actually came in. One of the specific use cases that we're doing now is we're actually doing 3 different POCs with different SIEM providers all at the same time. And we're able to spin each one up after about a week. And most of the time that week is just back end business conversations, talking about the NDAs and red lines and the back and forth between the legal teams. It isn't the actual technical implementation, because Cribl allowed us to actually send all of our data through one distinct pipeline. So going from source, Cribl, S3 bucket, Snowflake. And so it allows us to basically say, hey, this is where you need to integrate. And then the SIEM providers now are doing it. Does this approach work for everybody? No, but it works for us because we are a cloud first, SaaS first organization. And the way that Cribl allows us to really take ownership of the way we move our data allows us to have those conversations. Now, why is this important? Well, the reasons why that this is important is going back to the fact that we try to be an agile, forward-thinking organization, is we try to keep our contracts a year, 2 years at most, which means every year or two, we're pivoting to a new technology. Doesn't necessarily mean that every year we're kicking the old ones to the door, but every year we have the ability to do that because we're not locked into long-term contracts and we're not locked into long-term infrastructure changes, which take a long time to implement. And that was one of the problems that we were experiencing with our, I don't want to say legacy, because that has a tendency to mean that it's like old and kind of backwards. That's one of the problems that we had with our existing infrastructure, is that it wasn't nimble and it wasn't supporting the way that we like to do business. Now, being able to quickly pivot like this, just kind of going back to cost savings, which I know isn't really the main point, but being able to be agile like this allows us to avoid vendor lock-in, to where, you know, SIEM Solution X basically knows that they have their proprietary collectors and we have to integrate with those in order to actually do our security analytics. We don't have to do that anymore. Now we simply say, here's our requirements, here's your integration point, and this is how you get access to it. And then they go, they do their magic, and we still own the data. That's another thing, is sometimes SIEM providers, they end up storing data in their own proprietary storage system, or they put it in their own proprietary format. We don't want that. At the end of the day, we want to be able to take data that we had from, you know, our existing solution and be able to use it in a new solution. And you're not able to do that if you don't have that flexibility. And so that's one of the reasons, that's actually another reason why we moved into Cribl. You know, as far as architecture, things like that, yes, there was, and Jim, I'm sure you were privy to some of these conversations. We had pain points during implementation, you know, and in rolling some of these things out. But because the team was very responsive, we got through a lot of those hurdles with very little frustration on our side. I'll put it like that.
What about drama?
Yeah, there is definitely drama. Yeah.
Do tell.
Yeah, I think I can.
Build
So,
a team.
yeah, no, absolutely. So
Give me a couple
one of the
minutes.
things that, so in my past, and I didn't touch on this, I came from the financial industry and the defense industrial base. Now in the financial industry, I came from a hedge fund here in Connecticut that is known for radical transparency. I'll let people figure out which one that is. And so from that, I've always been in a position where I have to give very direct and sometimes ego hurting feedback to vendors and people who provide professional services. And I fully believe in what's called leader's intent, where you go in and you tell people, listen, this is what we want to accomplish. You're the professionals. We want you to come in and solution how we get from here to there. Because we don't know how to necessarily solve every single problem. That's what you pay experts and professional services to do. If I was able to come up with a very pedantic roadmap, what's the point in hiring professional services? I could just scale up my engineering team and just do it myself and move on to the next project. But you hire these people for their expertise. And we started running into problems with infrastructure and things like that. Now we had a general game plan for what we wanted to do. Basically, we were going to take the Cribl instances, put them right next to Splunk, and then just do port flips. And so where Splunk was listening, now Cribl will be listening on the same device. And so that way we didn't have to deploy any new infrastructure, things like that. Where we ran into issues was on Windows virtual machines, which were being used on-prem. Cribl right now doesn't support that. And so we actually had to go down the container route. And so then we were trying to deploy containers containing Cribl in order to get this done. Ultimately, was it successful? Yes. Were there some awkward conversations along the way about us as the customer wanting to pay for progress rather than time spent? Yes, we had some of those painful conversations, but ultimately I think it was a success. And the way that I look at it, and this is a partner that we've done business with for a long time, if every conversation we have with them is positive, if there's never any friction, that means one party is taking advantage of the other. There needs to be the friction, there needs to be the pushback in order to have an efficient relationship. And if you don't have an efficient relationship, well, then there's just waste and abuse taking place. And you need to course correct a little bit. I don't know, it's kind of like any good relationship with your spouse or your partner. Like if you guys don't fight every now and then, the passion's not there and somebody's really getting taken advantage of. So, you know, a fight every now and then is good. But yeah, so that was our drama. Went on for about 6 weeks. Ultimately, we did solution past it. I can't say enough good things about the team that Duca over at Cribl's put together. It's incredibly responsive, incredibly smart. And they definitely took the feedback that I have about leaders' intent and understanding what we're trying to do, and they helped us actually solution that. So I actually thought it was a really good engagement, aside from the hurt feelings.
Aw, the
Yeah, with
feelings.
that being said, that's kind of been my Cribl story in about 10 minutes as to why we use it, how we use it, and kind of a little bit of colorful history to it. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, we've got kind of a small group here today. I'm a little disappointed because I'm excited about your story, and I took some more notes because we're going to be writing a case study later, eventually. But what I think is going to happen is folks will be seeing this on YouTube and will have questions after the fact about, like, how did you set up that POC situation where you were trying out the different SIEMs that you were going to, considering switching to? Was there anything really complicated about that? I imagine you'll probably hear later some questions, but
Oh, yeah, of
obviously, if
course.
anybody has a question now.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so I guess maybe there's two parts to it. So one is, you're talking about syslog or whatever, whatever port flipping you're doing. So does your environment not use Kafka or have any kind of thing where you have a central, pub sub or whatever you want to call it, in the pipeline?
Yeah, that's a good question. Currently, our environment right now is federated. And actually, I apologize, I didn't give the business context for this. So we operate at Cimpress as an internal MSSP for 12 different business units. They all manage their own infrastructure, and they have their own IT teams. The only things that are centralized really are things where you get power in numbers, efficiency and scale. So security, logistics, things like that, as well as some platforms. So for the most part, the way that they manage their infrastructure, that's not really up to us to dictate unless it has security implications. That's why it was important to us to be able to take advantage of the existing infrastructure that we controlled, those Windows, Linux VMs, things like that. That's why we did the port swaps on those machines. There's no central management of those instances through like an Apache Kafka, anything like that.
Okay, and then the other thing that I was wondering is, you're mentioning you own the data. Are you talking about like long-term data retention within Cribl, or what? I guess, how does that come into play?
Yep. So a lot of SIMs, they'll do contextualization of data, and they'll say, oh, well, this event now has a risk score, and they'll start adding fields or tags. What we want at the end of the day is to own that data as well. And so basically we park it in S3 bucket, they do their contextualization analytics, and then it's routed into Snowflake for long-term storage.
So does that mean you're using Cribl to pull it back out of the SIM? Or is that?
No, that's done through
Oh.
API. Yeah, that's why we try to do everything SaaS or cloud first. That
Okay.
piece is done through API.
Got it. All right, thanks.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I think it was kind of some of the use cases that you mentioned, or some of the reasons. Like, there's always something new that you hear listening to somebody tell how they use like the fact that you can prototype multiple SIMs without having to worry about how you're going to get it into each one. That's a very good point.
Yeah, that was one of the key things we wanted to do, was be able to support startups and new technologies without having to completely redo our infrastructure. Our organization has a history of working with people who've just got, first round, second round of funding. And because of that, we want to be able to support them through design partnerships and different types of partnerships. And so this allows us to do it while also not interrupting the business of security.
I have a question. Do you see this as also enabling you to migrate to new or different security tools in the same manner? You're de-risking that migration and giving you the ability to test, to validate, and to roll back if you need to.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, there's tons of really cool projects out there of things that you could spin up on your own with a little bit of cloud resources. This allows us then to pipe data that's been already aggregated at that central point and then send it out to it. So think like Black Hills Rita or something like that, where you actually want to start doing like behavioral analytics or look for beacon detection, anything like that. This allows you to do it without, completely having to change legacy infrastructure. I mean, this is actually going to be a really nice thing.
Yeah.
Allows
And
everybody to kind of have their little mad
independence.
scientist projects.
Oh, definitely. Vendor and data independence.
Oh yeah, and 100%.
So I know your primary effort was to enable your team. Do you see benefits for your customers as well in implementing Logstream?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're very concerned with what we call a security baseline, where we have the basic log sources that we're looking for from the business unit to get, a high level or a basic level of control and visibility in the environment. You'll have some organizations that are way more advanced and they're starting to bring in flow logs and they're starting to do analytics on the customers and, dwell times in different parts of the websites, things like that. 100% they can do that because we're no longer concerned about ingesting it directly into a SIEM. We're just worried about collecting it in one central location. That another organization within SIEMpress, we call them the Data Tribe. They're actually really big into that. That's why we wound up with Snowflake as kind of the terminal end of it, because we're trying to make Snowflake the data repository for every single business unit, every single tribe.
Yep. So you mentioned 12 operating units. Is there a standard like security kit, as I'll call it, for all those 12 so that you have like regular data feeds coming in, or is there differences in each of the 12 units?
There is going to be a little bit of variance amongst them, but we call it the security baseline, and it was part of a project that took place last year where we wanted just fundamental things for control. So email logs, Active Directory, EDR, WAF, pick your 5 sources. And that allowed us to get the most MITRE attack coverage possible with the minimal amount of sources. That was important because you have some businesses that'll have an IT staff of 150 people, and then you'll have the shop that's being held together by 2 guys, and one of them's on maternity leave. And so it's really hard to implement, and it's hard to institute a baseline. And the last thing we wanted to get into was the business of exception writing, where we're constantly having to say, oh, well, businesses 1 through 3 are gaining an exception just because of their size. Well, no, that's why we're calling it a baseline. You can exceed it. We can go well above and do even more secure things with your team directly. But for the entire organization, this is what we want to do. And that allows us to have, really good conversations, every year, actually twice a year with the board of directors and with our insurance providers about like, okay, well, as an organization, as SIEMpress, this is where we're at. Yes, you're going to have your pockets of excellence. Yes, you're going to have your pockets where you have technical debt that you're building back from. But overall, this is where we're at. And then when you come to insurance providers, so ransomware, cyber insurance, things like that, they don't care about how your best business unit is performing. They want to know about, the one that is having the struggles. And so by doing a baseline, we can guarantee that everybody's at a certain playing field.
Okay. Insightful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I'll ask a quick question. So you mentioned bringing in data from the source through your SIEM, sending it to S3, splitting it off, sending it to Snowflake. Curious from the vendor side, the SIEMs, the Snowflakes, were they surprised that sometimes these groups are seeing Cribl for the first time, that, if you said to Snowflake, hey, I want to bring in this data from these sources through my SIEM, split to S3, then to Snowflake, were they scratching their head a little bit like, hey, how do we do this? And you're like, I got a solution. Or how did they react to that?
No, fortunately, the way that the data is being routed into S3 is just raw data. And so there's no proprietary schema put on top of it. It's just raw data that we're sending. And so as long as they're able to take data feeds in general, like there was no surprises for them. and we were very fortunate where we have dedicated engineers on the data engineering side who all they want to do is the care and feeding of Snowflake and that particular repository. And so they really offloaded a lot of that work for us.
Awesome, thank you.
Ironically, though, a couple of the SIEM providers that we looked at before we finalized, we actually went to Snowflake and said, hey, who are your favorite vendors to work with? And then they gave us a list and we started working backwards from there with our requirements. You know, who met requirements, who didn't. And then that's how we netted out with the 3 that we ultimately are doing POCs with. One of them wasn't far enough along maturity wise. And so we gave them the feedback and we gave them the commitment to, you know, considering them in the next time we do POCs. But ultimately, they just weren't where we needed to be. So realistically, in the last couple of weeks, we're now down to 2 POCs, which is good because we have to make a decision by end of next week. So not a bad place to be in.
Hey, John, it's Mark. So I have a question for you out of curiosity. I understand why you want to have raw data in S3 buckets on AWS. Why do you want to move them then from S3 to Snowflake?
Yep. So with S3, not only are you paying for the storage, you're paying for the processing of it. And so if we move it into Snowflake, we're no longer paying for the processing. So that's one thing that we wanted to decouple it from. Also, because of the way we are storing all of our organization's data long-term, not just security data, we had very competitive pricing to keep it inside of Snowflake.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't really have a lot of Splunk background, but it sounded like you were mentioning something in regards to Splunk. So the modular inputs, like something I kind of remember when I dabbled in there, and I'm assuming with any tooling, there may be some kind of like an extension that's familiar with a certain log type and puts it into some standard format that the tool itself, like a common schema or whatever you want to call it. Is there anything, I mean, you're talking about Snowflake now, so maybe it's not applicable, but you know, thinking of, would you have to, or did you have to in any place reinvent the wheel of like something that may have been turnkey, but then, you know, obviously there's a lot of value added using this, but you know, did you have to backtrack a little bit in any way to accommodate some of the things that may have been done in, you know, previously?
Yeah, we did actually. When we first started the POC process, we were thinking, oh, we'll organize everything just by business unit and dump the logs in, you know, a couple of different ways. And then through having conversations, we started figuring out, oh, well, the best way is business unit tool types. So think EDR, firewall, whatever, and then start going into your dates for the buckets. We had to do that twice. We had to kind of pivot on the way that we were moving or storing the logs in S3. The other thing, and this is the nice thing, one of the benefits, one of the real big benefits of working with smaller organizations is when you go to work with them, they're more flexible to working with your specific use cases. And being able to pivot year to year with flexible infrastructure, that's allowed us to do that. Some of the POCs that we're doing right now are companies that only have about 50 customers total. And so, you know, as you know, I'm not going to say Cimpress is a large organization. We're only about 15,000 individuals. But as an organization that's mid-sized, we're able to influence their roadmap enough that they tend to work with the requirements that we give them. Whereas if you went with like, I don't know, something older, like QRadar, ArcSight, something like that, they would be like, oh, that's really cool, you're doing it that way, but this is how you're going to do it if you want to play with us. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else? A lot of questions out of such a small group.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, honestly, it's good. It feels more like a round table. We're just kind of sitting around like, oh, well, what do you think about this? You know?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah, about 15 minutes away from teaching people how to count cards.
Let's do it. Let's do it now.
Sounds
All right, last chance. Actually, this was never last chance. There's always the Slack to ask questions. Eugene, did you want to do a raffle this week, or did you want to, or this time, or did you want to wait till next time?
I
Probably
don't
just be
see
like, if you're not actually from Cribl, then you get.
You know,
You win.
Exactly.
people will be incentivized to show up, right?
Yeah, sure. There's plenty of incentives to show up. Not just, crappy t-shirts.
Extra.
But I will be sending, John, unless you've already received one of our fancy hoodies, I will be sending you one. And thanks.
Oh,
for
that's phenomenal. Yeah,
So if you
just
can
in time
DM
for the
me-
fall. I love it.
DM me your mailing address and your size, and I will send you a package.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
Thank you. I was typing into our internal Slack about how we should have you on the podcast. I'm super interested in this approach that you're so, able to be so flexible and and change. You're always looking at changing tools when that's like the last thing someone in your position typically wants to do.
Yeah.
Is like have to deal with, oh God, those retool, everything means everything is changing. And I'm just super interested in that idea. So
Yeah, well, it's funny so before this, I came from the defense industrial base, and that was my second foray into that space. And you tend to find that people want big names. They want things that their value is in reputation, not in what they deliver, but what they've delivered historically. And people just don't want to take a risk.
Yeah.
And I get that you don't want to take a risk because you do some sort of, qualitative number game in your head. But at the end of the day, what's the bigger risk? Being left behind as technology advances and you're not able to fully integrate with something that can actually solve a problem? Or is the bigger risk having to learn a new technology and make yourself a little bit uncomfortable? Honestly, I would rather be uncomfortable, because if there's not stress and friction, then you're not growing.
And there's this you're disincentivized after a while, regardless of the value or lack of value by, long change control processes and lots of paperwork and all that stuff. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't even get me started.
I'm just like,
I
you
won't
live
say
in this great world.
I won't say at which organization I used to work it for, but one of the companies I worked for that supported the military, we had to go to eBay for replacement parts. So shows you how long in the tooth they can get on that.
Vintage. Yeah.
Vintage.
Got to go to the antique shop to get new drives. Amazing. Well, Eugene, what would you like to do?
Well, how many people do we have that are eligible for raffle?
I think it's just 2. So if we did 2 raffles, how about if you attended this meeting and you are not a Cribl employee, DM me your size and your mailing address, and I will send you a package.
You get swag, and you get swag, and they're just 2 of you.
Oh my God, I feel like I'm on
You get a
Oprah.
package. Okay.
Look under your chair. You have a sweatshirt.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get some new swag soon, so it might take me a little while to get to you. I just heard that the shop is down right now while they restock, so be patient.
Awesome.
We'll get it to you. Cool. Oh, hey, I see a camera that wasn't on before. Hello. All right. Cool. Anything else? Anyone? Are we going to learn how to count cards now?
Yeah, actually, it's super simple. It's funny. So prior to coming into this, I worked as a pit boss in Vegas for like 6 years at the Flamingo. And then I went and worked for the state for a little bit as a prison guard. And then I came back and I did surveillance at the Mirage. And because of my gaming background, working on card games, all I did day in, day out was just look for cheats. And particularly on blackjack, because it's super simple. Low cards, you just add 1. So like if you see a 2 through a 6, it's +1. If you see a 10 through an ace, it's -1. And you don't even care about the cards right in the middle, because what you want is to know when the deck is really heavy on the plus side, because that's when you start going crazy with your bets. A little bit of a pro tip, they won't throw you out for counting cards if you don't change the amount you bet by more than 5 times. So if you start with like $10, don't go above 50, they won't even bother throwing you out.
Too bad nobody's going to Vegas for comp. We taking you out to dinner.
Yeah, no, it's funny. If you go to, I had a friend who worked at Aria, which was one of the newer properties, and they have a greatest hits collection tapes where you can go and watch people doing every single cheat you can think of, whether it's, with the cameras while they're playing Baccarat, or trying to, cheat while they're playing dice, all those things. Like, you just go in the surveillance room and you can watch it, and it's absolutely amazing. A lot of it is almost like what they call the like street magicians, where it's all sleight of hand. You see a lot of that. So, but that's the nice thing about cameras. Like, you don't have to catch them in the moment. You just need to know something's wrong. Then you work backwards. So.
That's quite the background you've had, working for the prison and working in Vegas.
It turns out I was too pretty for prison, so I was like, nope, gotta go back to school.
I think I'm gonna have to put a timestamp for this in the description of the YouTube recording.
Too pretty for prison. We're gonna put
just
that
the
as
whole
your
counting cards and
subtitle.
the looking back into
Awesome.
into the yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Very cool. All right.
Yeah. And see you back next month.
John,
Right,
thank
take
you
care,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you
Yeah.
so
Bye.
much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Take care.
Awesome.